the abyssal creature. The research vessel floated like a solitary sentinel above the Mariana Trench, the deepest and most mysterious part of the Pacific Ocean. On board, Dr. Claire Mason stood by the controls, her gaze fixed on the endless blue below. This was more than just another expedition. It was a chance to unlock the ocean's darkest secrets. Remember, she addressed her team, what we discover today could change everything we know about marine biology. Captain Harris, a grizzled veteran of the seas, remained silent for a moment, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the horizon. The ocean has its own rules, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. There are things down there that don't want to be found. Lena, the youngest of the crew, fidgeted with her equipment, her excitement barely contained. I can't believe we're really doing this, she whispered, a mix of awe and anxiety in her voice. The unknown beckoned her, a mystery she couldn't resist. As the submersible began its descent, the light from above faded, replaced by a thick, inky blackness. Strange, luminescent creatures drifted past, their eerie glow casting unsettling shadows. With every meter, the pressure increased, and so did the sense of foreboding, as if the darkness itself was alive, watching, waiting. As the submersible continued its descent, the sonar pinged, revealing a massive anomaly on the ocean floor. The screen displayed a structure unlike anything they'd expected. A vast, angular formation, unnatural in its precision. Dr. Claire Mason leaned in, eyes narrowing. That shouldn't be here, she whispered, her scientific curiosity piqued. They guided the submersible closer, and the structure came into view, bathed in the submersible's lights. It was enormous, with surfaces covered in strange, alien-like carvings that seemed to pulse with a faint, eerie glow. The carvings were intricate, depicting shapes and symbols that defied easy interpretation. We should leave it alone, Captain Harris warned, his voice edged with unease. But Dr. Mason was resolute. We've come too far to turn back now. We need to understand what this is. Ignoring the captain's reservations, the team suited up and exited the submersible in their specialized diving suits. As they floated closer, Lena traced her fingers over the carvings, her brow furrowing. These symbols, they're not just decorative, she said, her voice trembling. They look like warnings about something huge, something dangerous. The moment the team touched the carvings, the ocean floor began to quake. From beneath the structure, an enormous shape began to unfurl, moving with a terrifying grace. The creature's massive form emerged from the shadows, dwarfing the submersible with its size. It wasn't just a mindless animal. There was an unsettling intelligence in the way it observed them, as if it was studying their every move. Suddenly, the creature struck. It rammed the submersible with terrifying force, sending shockwaves through the vessel. Alarms blared as the team scrambled to regain control, but the damage was severe. Systems flickered, and the hull groaned under the pressure. We need to get out of here now, Captain Harris shouted, his voice barely masking his fear. But escape was impossible. The creature was toying with them, using the crushing deep-sea currents to block their path, like a predator playing with its prey. Each attempt to flee was met with another violent assault, driving the team deeper into panic. As the submersible shuddered from another hit, Lena's voice broke through the chaos, trembling. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Through the static of the radio, strange, ancient whispers began to filter in, a language that none of them could understand. But it was clear the creature did, and it was speaking directly to them. The submersible creaked and groaned, the sounds of its failing structure a grim reminder of their dire situation. The creature, relentless and unyielding, circled them, its presence growing ever more oppressive. Dr. Mason, voice strained, tried to rally her team. "We can't give up now," she urged, but the desperation in her tone betrayed her words. They all knew the truth. There was no escape. Suddenly, the creature struck again, but this time it wasn't toying with them. Massive appendages wrapped around the submersible, dragging it toward a gaping, pitch-black chasm that seemed to have no end. As they were pulled deeper, the crushing pressure of the ocean intensified, warping their perceptions. The walls of the submersible seemed to close in, the darkness outside seeping into their minds. Reality itself felt like it was unraveling, and they couldn't tell if the hallucinations were born of fear or if the creature was invading their thoughts. The descent was endless, the abyss pulling them into its cold, unforgiving embrace. Just as the darkness became absolute, the creature let out a mind-bending roar, a sound so powerful, so alien, that it silenced everything. The last thing they heard was that roar, echoing in their minds, before they were consumed by the abyss, swallowed whole by the endless night. The drowned town, Lake Regia, stretched out like a mirror, its still surface reflecting the distant mountains under a pale, overcast sky. Beneath its tranquil waters lay the ruins of a forgotten village, a place where time had stopped decades ago when the town was deliberately flooded to create the lake. The only visible remnant was the church steeple, rising eerily from the water like a ghostly sentinel. Marco, a passionate diver with a fascination for lost history, couldn't resist the lure of the submerged town. He had heard the stories, the whispers of strange happenings beneath the lake's surface, but they only fueled his obsession. His girlfriend, Julia, however, was far less eager. The idea of diving into a place where people had once lived, and possibly died, filled her with a deep unease. Still, she loved Marco and agreed to accompany him, hoping her fears were unfounded. As they prepared their gear, an elderly villager named Paolo approached them. His face was weathered, his eyes shadowed with a lifetime of knowledge. "That village should be left alone," he warned, his voice grave. "There are things down there, lost souls that don't take kindly to visitors." But Marco was undeterred. Ignoring Paolo's warnings, he and Julia set out at dawn, the lake shrouded in a thick, creeping mist. As they descended into the cold, dark water, the steeple loomed ahead, a ghostly reminder of the town below, waiting to reveal its secrets. Marco and Julia glided through the submerged streets of the drowned village, the water around them murky and cold. Decaying buildings loomed on either side, their walls covered in algae and their windows dark, like empty eyes staring out from the past. The eerie silence was broken only by the rhythmic sound of their breathing and the occasional creak of ancient wood shifting under the weight of the water. Marco's eyes were wide with wonder as he took in the remnants of the once thriving village. He marveled at how the structures had withstood the passage of time, imagining the lives that had been lived here before the waters claimed the town. But as they swam deeper, Julia's unease grew. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Out of the corner of her eye, she caught glimpses of faint shadows flitting through the water, always just beyond her full view. Their exploration led them to the village church, its steeple now far above them. They entered through the broken doors, finding the interior strangely intact. The pews, though waterlogged, remained in place, and the altar stood untouched, as if still waiting for a congregation that would never return. As they moved through the silent sanctuary, Julia froze. Faint whispers echoed around them, distorted by the water, words she couldn't understand but that filled her with dread. "Do you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling through the comm link. But Marco, entranced by the ancient surroundings, dismissed it. "Just the water playing tricks," he replied, moving deeper into the church, oblivious to the growing fear in Julia's heart. As Marco and Julia ventured deeper into the submerged village, the shadows that had been mere flickers at the edge of Julia's vision began to take shape. Dark, indistinct forms moved among the ruins, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to beckon, guiding them further into the heart of the forgotten town. Marco, who had initially brushed off Julia's concerns, now seemed oddly entranced. His eyes glazed over as if he were listening to something only he could hear, nodding slightly in response to the unseen voices. "Marco, we need to leave," Julia urged, her voice tinged with panic. The oppressive weight of the water around them felt heavier now, as though an unseen force was pressing in on them from all sides. She could feel a presence, something malevolent and ancient, lurking just beyond their sight. But Marco was lost in his trance, his movements slow and deliberate, as if he were being guided by invisible hands. Suddenly, a powerful current surged through the village, grabbing hold of them both. It was as if the lake itself had come alive, pulling them toward the center of the village with an unstoppable force. Julia struggled against it, fear gripping her as she fought to break free. But Marco, under the thrall of the voices, didn't resist. He let the current carry him, his gaze fixed ahead, oblivious to Julia's frantic cries. The current dragged them toward an ancient crypt, half buried in the silt and darkness. Julia's heart pounded as she realized where they were headed. She could feel the presence growing stronger, closing in on them. Desperate, she reached out to Marco, but he slipped through her grasp, drawn deeper into the crypt's shadowy maw, leaving her to face the darkness alone. Julia's breath caught in her throat as she watched Marco disappear into the crypt, the shadows swallowing him whole. She swam after him, her heart hammering in her chest, but the darkness inside the crypt was suffocating. As she entered, she saw them, ghostly figures emerging from the walls, their forms distorted and pale. These were the spirits of the drowned villagers, their hollow eyes fixed on Marco. They circled him slowly, their hands outstretched, as if welcoming him into their eternal embrace. Marco stood motionless, his eyes wide with terror, yet he made no attempt to flee. The spirits began to close in, their whispers now a deafening chorus of sorrow and rage. Julia screamed through the water, but no sound escaped. She could only watch in helpless horror as the spirits took hold of Marco, their cold fingers pressing against his skin. His eyes, once so full of life, grew dull and lifeless, reflecting the dark, unforgiving depths of the lake. His face twisted in agony as the transformation began, his body becoming one with the lost souls of the village. Desperation surged through Julia, giving her the strength to break free from the current that still tugged at her. She kicked hard, propelling herself away from the crypt, her lungs burning as she raced toward the surface. Behind her, the whispers faded, replaced by a chilling silence that seemed to echo through the water. As she broke through the surface, gasping for air, the calm of Lake Regia was a stark contrast to the nightmare she had just escaped. But the image of Marco's lifeless eyes, staring up at her from the depths, would never leave her. She knew the spirits had claimed him, and that they would keep him forever, a part of the drowned town beneath the lake. The siren's call. The island was a lonely, windswept speck in the vast North Atlantic, its rocky shores battered by relentless waves. For years, Gerald had lived there alone, a solitary fisherman who found solace in the isolation. The island was harsh, unforgiving, a place where the wind howled through the night and the sea seemed to stretch endlessly into the gray horizon. It was a world apart, cut off from the warmth of human connection. Lila, Gerald's estranged sister, arrived on the island after years of sparse communication. She was immediately struck by the desolation of the place, but even more so by the change in her brother. Gerald, once full of life and laughter, had become a shadow of his former self, withdrawn, distracted, his eyes always fixed on the distant sea. He spoke little, but when he did, it was often about a strange singing he heard at night, a haunting melody that drifted over the water. Lila dismissed it at first, thinking it was just the wind playing tricks, but Gerald was insistent. "It's real, Lila. I hear it every night." As the days passed, Gerald's obsession with the song grew. He stayed up late, listening intently, his behavior becoming more erratic. He began to neglect his fishing, spending long hours by the shore, staring out at the waves as if waiting for something. Lila tried to reason with him, urging him to leave the island and return to the mainland with her. But he brushed her off, growing more distant and secretive. Soon, Lila herself began to hear faint echoes of the song, just at the edge of her hearing, a melody that seemed to whisper to her from the depths. She struggled to resist its pull, but a deep unease took root in her heart, sensing that something was very wrong. Gerald's obsession with the siren's call consumed him, driving him to the brink of madness. He began to venture out on dangerous fishing trips, often in the dead of night, when the waves were most treacherous. His appearance deteriorated, dark circles formed under his eyes, his skin grew pale, and his once strong frame became gaunt. A haunted look settled into his gaze, as if the song had taken hold of his very soul. Lila watched in horror as her brother slipped further away. She grew desperate, pleading with him to stop, to leave the island and come back to the mainland with her. But Gerald had shut her out completely, spending his days alone on the water or locked in his small cabin. He muttered incessantly about the song, speaking of promises it made, of secrets it would reveal if only he could find its source. One night, as a fierce storm lashed the island, Gerald's obsession reached its peak. Despite the howling wind and crashing waves, he took his boat out, driven by an overwhelming urge to follow the song. Lila, terrified for his safety, tried to stop him, shouting for him to come back. But Gerald ignored her, his eyes glazed over with determination. He pushed off into the storm, leaving her standing helplessly on the shore. As the storm raged through the night, Lila waited anxiously for Gerald's return. But when dawn broke and there was still no sign of him, panic set in. She set out in her own boat, battling the rough seas and her mounting fear. Eventually, she found Gerald's boat adrift near a rocky outcrop, but he was nowhere to be seen. Heart pounding, Lila boarded the boat, finding it eerily silent, with only the faint, almost inaudible echo of the siren's song lingering in the air. It was as if the sea itself had swallowed him whole. Lila's heart nearly stopped when she spotted Gerald standing at the edge of the boat, staring down into the dark water below. She called out to him, but he didn't respond, his gaze fixed on something beneath the surface. As she hurried closer, Lila saw her, a beautiful, ethereal figure floating just below the water, her long, flowing hair shimmering in the dim light. The siren's eyes were captivating, drawing Gerald in with a gaze that promised secrets and solace. But as Lila drew nearer, the siren's true form began to emerge. The once beautiful face twisted into something monstrous, her enchanting eyes turning cold and dead. Her lips curled back to reveal sharp, jagged teeth, and her limbs, once graceful, now appeared twisted and unnatural, like something dredged up from the depths of a nightmare. With a sudden, violent motion, the creature lunged at Gerald, her clawed hands gripping him tightly, pulling him closer to the water's edge. Gerald, nu! Lila screamed, her voice breaking with desperation. But Gerald was lost, completely entranced by the siren's call. His mind no longer his own. Lila grabbed his arm, trying to yank him away from the creature's grasp. But the siren's hold was too strong. The boat rocked dangerously as the struggle intensified. In a final, desperate effort, Lila lunged at her brother, but it was too late. The siren, now fully revealed in her horrific form, dragged Gerald into the water with terrifying strength. The last thing Lila saw was Gerald's terrified face as he disappeared beneath the waves, his eyes wide with fear as the dark, icy depths swallowed him whole. The water went still, the storm subsiding as if nothing had happened. All that remained was the haunting echo of the siren's song, a chilling melody that would forever haunt Lila's memories. Shaken and alone, Lila somehow managed to steer the boat back to the island. Every stroke of the oars felt heavy, the weight of what she had just witnessed pressing down on her chest. Gerald's final moments, his terrified face, the siren's monstrous form, played on an endless loop in her mind. The island, once merely lonely, now felt suffocating, its isolation amplifying her grief and fear. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every whisper of the wind a reminder of the horror that lurked just beyond the shore. As night fell, Lila retreated to the small cabin, but sleep was impossible. The siren's call, now clearer and more persistent, echoed in her mind, refusing to be ignored. It was as if the song was wrapping itself around her thoughts, pulling her deeper into its thrall. Despite her terror, Lila felt a strange, irresistible compulsion to listen, the same pull that had ensnared Gerald. By midnight, the siren's call was overwhelming, a haunting melody that seemed to seep into her very soul. Lila found herself standing on the shore, her eyes fixed on the dark, endless expanse of the water. The song grew louder, its echoes bouncing off the cliffs and resonating deep within her. The madness that had claimed Gerald now whispered to her, promising solace in the cold depths below. Unable to resist, Lila took a step closer to the water's edge, her heart pounding with fear and a strange, twisted longing. The song filled the night air, drowning out all reason. As the waves lapped at her feet, Lila's fate hung in the balance, her thoughts consumed by the siren's call, the same dark pull that had taken her brother. The story ends with Lila staring into the abyss, the water's cold embrace beckoning as the siren's song fills the night.